Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to start a new board game war game playthrough with Sherman Leader, which is a 2017 game from Dan Verssen Games. It's a tactical combat game, single player. So we're going to play the Allied forces against the Germans. And one of the neat things about this game is that it has really kind of two levels to it. One is your campaign level, where you're going to kind of pick your forces and set up your forces and then manage them over the course of a multi-week campaign. And then you manage the battles that happen within the course of each week. So each week consists of about 1 to 3 different battles. In this episode, we're going to set up our campaign. Then episode 2, we're going to start our first battle. So let's dig in and get started with a quick overview. And then rather than kind of give a rules explanation before we start, I think we can just jump in and I can explain things as we go. So if you haven't played the game before, this probably will be helpful in learning how to play too. So let's jump in and get started with a quick overview. So just to help center ourselves in kind of what the visual look of the game is as we're going to be playing, here's an overview of the board and the headquarters card. And let's just briefly kind of situate these and how the game works. But one thing before we do that, it's also important to know that Sherman Leader has a lot of cards that come into play. Commander cards, the Allied units are all information is represented on cards, and there's a lot of decks of cards that kind of get integrated into play. And we'll explain those as we go forward. And of course, there's a lot of counters too. So we'll explain those as we go forward too. But to explain what we're looking at right now, on the left side, we can see what's called the headquarters card. And the headquarters card is where you contain a lot of information, a lot of helpful information about how we're going to manage the campaign as this multi-week campaign unfolds. And then on the right side, more or less behind me, you can see the battle map, which is a hexagon representation. And it may not be clear from the video piece here, but those are tile sets, and you can flip them over to represent desert tiles. There's winter, there's jungle, and the set that we're going to be using for our campaign is the European set. So the nice thing about it is that these tile sets are interchangeable, and almost every battle is going to have a different map that you're going to be using. Then surrounding this hex map that you can see is a lot of information and support that helps the individual battles be performed. To the left, we can see the event cards and the special condition cards which come into play. Above that on the left side is the turn marker guide. There's a sequence of play, very helpful at the top of the map, of the top of the board here. The top right, which we'll take a look at shortly, is actually a very important box, which is kind of, for lack of a better term, I'll call it the operations level box. And then we've got some movement guides and some other informational pieces to the right side. But most of our episodes are going to be centered on this battle map behind my head that you're going to see, where this is where we're going to have the fighting that's going to occur. So let's get started and dig in. The first thing that we have to do is to choose our campaign. And the way you choose a campaign in the game is you pick one of the 9 campaign cards that the game comes with. 6 of the campaigns are in the European theater of operations and 3 are in Asia against the Japanese. For our campaign, we are going to pick Italy in 1943. So let's move these out of the way and let's just talk briefly about the information that's on the card. So we can see that in the top left-hand corner, we've got the Axis forces sign there. So we're going to be fighting against Germany. Happens in 1943. Then this little box here is the difficulty. It's standard level difficulty. The plus 46 tells us how many special options points we get by using this scenario, by using this campaign. And the special option points are kind of like your currency in the game. They're what you use to buy your forces, what you use to fix units, what you use to kind of heal commanders, and sometimes solve other problems in the game. And one of the things to note, that one of the ways to lose the game is if we run out of these special option points. So we want to be very careful how we use them through the course of the game. This tells us the theater. This has a special rule, which is that the German morale, enemies only suffer -1 from tactical movement rolls when at half strength. So that's going to make the enemies a little bit more aggressive as we fight them on the battle map. And then down here is the distribution of the quality of leaders we get at the start of the game. Recruit, green, average, skilled, veteran, and ace. The game has commanders, and all of our units and tanks will have commanders attached to them. We'll talk about that more briefly, but this gives us the skill distribution of how those commanders are going to be when they start the game. So with that being said, now it's time to pick the operation that we're going to use. So now that we've picked our campaign, we want to pick our objective card. And the objective card really kind of describes what type of operation we're going to be playing in the game. Some of them here, as you can see, rush to the front. Each one's a little bit different in how it plays out. We've got a holding action, and there's 6 cards here that represent different kind of objectives or operations that you can play in the game. The one that we're going to play is called Invasion. And by the way, that's kind of one of the interesting things about the game. The fun things about the game is that you've got 9 campaigns, and each campaign could have one of 6 different objectives or operations to it. So you've really got 54 different kind of starting scenarios that you can build into the game. So it's got a lot of replayability in terms of how you set up your campaign. But let's talk a little bit about what this Invasion card, the information on it, and how it's going to impact our play. First of all, on the top left, we can see that we've got starting special options points. We're going to take this and combine it with the plus 46, and that's going to give us 96 special option points. And the first thing we're going to do with that is buy our units, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Now, the length of the campaign, we're going to do a short one. They range from 3 to 8 weeks. This Invasion one is a 3-week campaign, which means we're probably going to have anywhere from 3 to 9 different battles within this campaign. Probably about 6 would be my best guess. Then we get some kind of weekly special options points. This is kind of reinforcement points to help fix problems and, upgrade commanders and fix units and all kinds of things like that. Then down here, we kind of get with the campaign a little bit of the description of what this operation is going to be. The battalion points we'll talk about next. This is going to what we use to determine the enemy battalions we're going to be fighting against. We'll show that in a minute. And then here's some special rules for this one. We're going to add 5 to all the battalion operational moves, which basically means that the enemy battalions are going to be coming at us pretty fast here in this campaign. So we really are going to have to make sure that we keep the enemy battalions out of our backyard. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. So we are getting invaded and we are defending against this invasion. We also get 1 extra attack die when attacking at range 0, which can be very helpful. And then this is our evaluation. Basically, you get points by how many battalions you destroy or reduce to half strength. And the more battalions you destroy and reduce to half strength, the more victory points you're going to have and the better your evaluation is. So we're hoping to get somewhere up in this above 10 anyway for adequate, good, or great. We'll talk more about how that works out as we go forward. So now that we've got our campaign picked out and we've got our objective or our operation picked out, let's determine our enemy forces. And the way we're going to use that is we're going to use this number here, the 24 battalion points, and we're going to pick our enemy forces up until that amount. Now it's time to determine what battalions we're going to be fighting against in this campaign. And the way you do this is, again, through a card-driven mechanic. There's a deck of battalion cards for the German forces, and they consist of 3 different types. There's assault battalions, supply battalions, and command battalions. And if we take a look at one of these battalion cards, we can kind of see what information is on it. We've basically got what type it is, we've got what it consists of, so this one is 4 tanks, 2 half-tracks, and 4 cars, its name. And then here, for most importantly right now, is this number 3, which is the victory point total that this basic battalion is worth. So we have 24 battalion points altogether. And the way you determine the enemy battalions you're going to be fighting against in the campaign is you pick 2 cards from the assault deck, 1 card from the supply deck, and 1 card from the command deck, and then you keep going in that same pattern until the total victory point number for all the battalions you've picked is 24 or greater for this particular invasion scenario. So I'm going to do that now, and then we're going to take a look at what types of enemy battalions we're going to be facing. So I've gone through now and I've randomly picked out our battalions that we're going to be fighting in the course of this campaign. And just for context too, each one of our battles will be against 1 individual battalion. So we might be going up, for example, against the artillery unit or the infantry, but each battle is going to be against 1 battalion. So we have 6. They came out to exactly 24 points. We have 4 assault battalions and 1 supply and 1 command battalion. Just some general observations. We got the large tank force, which has 8 tanks, 2 half-tracks, 2 rifles, 2 machine guns, 2 anti-tank guns, and 2 armored cars. This is huge. This is going to be a big battle when we get to that one. We also have a headquarters that is extremely large too, that'll be sitting behind the enemy forces. So that could be a big battle. And then we have some smaller ones. This artillery unit is relatively small, as well as this small tank force, and then the scout force is pretty small too. So now let's take a look and see how these integrate onto the operations map and determine which units we're going to be fighting against. Let's take a look now at how these battalions are represented on this operations map, which is on the right side of the screen here. This is an important kind of conceptual piece to understand. This is more so almost, it looks like a chart, but it's really a map. And what it shows you we have 6 bands here, from enemy breakthrough to friendly staging. And at the bottom of the map, this really represents kind of our area, our lines. And we can see the third one up here is the front. So this represents the front lines of the battle. So anything above this is enemy territory. Anything below this is our territory. And each one of the battalion cards has a designation. So for example, this scout force is designated as 4A. That gets represented by a counter on this operations map. So here is 4A. And basically, thinking of it as kind of the front lines of a battle, any enemy battalions in our backyard, in friendly transit or friendly staging, are a problem. That means that these enemy units have broken through our lines and they're behind our lines. Anything that's on the other side of the front is farther away from our lines and represents less of an immediate threat. Now, we've picked the invasion objective in operation, so that means that these units are going to be moving forward pretty fast. So we're going to be expecting a lot of pressure coming onto our front and into our friendly transit and friendly staging area. And so you can also see down here that there's underneath friendly staging, it's got -6 standard operation points per battalion. That means at the end of each week, if there's a functional full-strength enemy battalion in these areas, we have to pay this standard, this special operations point cost. And those special operation points cost, again, we start with 96 of them in this. If we can't pay that fee, we lose the game. So right away, you can see an immediate problem that we've got to face is that we've got this scout force, this battalion 4A, that starts the game in our friendly staging area. So if we end the first week with this battalion in our staging area, we're going to lose 6 special option points, potentially losing the game if we can't pay that. So right now you can see how the first battle and the first week's battles are going to dictate. We're probably going to be sending some of our forces in the first week to take on this enemy scout force. Likewise, with 3 battalions coming to the front and then friendly transit pretty quickly, we're probably going to have to try to take on one of these units as well. And it's worth noting that 1A is that large tank force, which is a particularly thorny opponent. So we've got our work cut out for us. And at the end of each week, these units are going to move forward or stay where they are. And our job is going to be keeping them out of our backyard. So this is our first problem. One quick fix. After I shot this whole video, I noticed some errata on Dan Verssen's site for the game. And one of the errata pieces was to modify 2 of the German battalions that we actually selected. And one thing that it does change is their starting locations. So that scout force that I mentioned that starts actually by the official rules in the friendly staging area actually is supposed to start in the front, as well as the small tank force is supposed to start in the enemy rear rather than the enemy transit area. So I've moved those units back. That's actually very helpful for us because it creates a lot less pressure on us to destroy a lot of stuff in the first 2 weeks of the campaign. We'll still want to go after that scout camp unit early on because at the end of week 1, we can expect he's going to be in our friendly transit area, causing us problems and costing us special options points. So we're definitely going to fight that scout unit in the first part of the first week of the campaign. But yeah, the errata there, and I've printed out here the modified units, the modified battalion cards that contain the correct information rather than the erroneous information. So I'm glad I noticed that because it does make it a little bit easier for us. And sorry for not catching it before I shot that whole video. Now that we've picked a campaign, an objective, and determined the enemy battalions and where they are on the operations map, now comes the fun part. You can see a pile of unit cards in front of me. Now we get to buy our forces. We mentioned earlier that we have 96 special options points to purchase our units with. And the way you do that is you do that by selecting particular cards within this deck of cards that represents all the allied units. Now, each one of these deck of cards is also going to have a counter that's going to be represented on the battle map, but we're going to use these cards to refer to find out the particular set of information about each one of those units. The only thing to notice right now is that how we're going to do this is that each one of these cards in the top right corner has a number. This is the special options cost of that unit. So we have 96 points. This one here would cost us 5 to purchase. This one would cost us 8. And again, these units we're going to carry through with us through the entire campaign. So we want to choose wisely. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take those 96 points and I'm going to use most, but not all of them. We're going to hold a little bit of a reserve and we're going to purchase the units that we're going to use in the campaign. So I'll be right back once I've got that done. Alrighty, this is a lot to look at, but here are the 12 units that we've purchased. And we've used 88 of our 96 special options points. So we've held off 8 of them in reserve. But basically I went with 4 tanks and 8 infantry units. And now I'm just going to kind of walk through these in sets of 4 to kind of do a brief explanation of some of the thinking behind why I picked these units. So we picked 4 rifle squads. And part of my thinking is we have 3 here that are just basic rifle squads, and 1 that's an experienced rifle team. Part of my thinking is that these rifle teams are cheap and they only cost 3 special options points, and our tanks are expensive, as we'll certainly see. So unfortunately, one of the things we want the enemy doing is we want them shooting at these cheap units so that if they die, it's not going to cost us a lot in special options points. So these really, if you want to think of it, we're going to push these guys forward and ask them to get shot at. That's their basic purpose in the game here. Just a real brief overview. We'll talk about this more as we get into combat, but there's a few important bits and pieces of information on these units. This AP attack and HE attack, armor piercing attack, and high explosive attack. These are the die rolls that you need either to equal or go greater than in order to hit enemy units. And you get 2 shots per turn in the battle game. So as we can see with armor piercing attack at 8, rifle teams are going to be very ineffective against armored units. They're only going to hit on a roll of an 8, 9, or 10. They're going to be pretty effective though against infantry high explosive targets. They're going to hit on rolls of 5 or 10, so basically a 60% chance of hitting. We're also looking at the range, which is 0 to 1. This game does have ranged combat, so they're only going to be able to attack units in the same hex as them or adjacent to them. Also important factors we're looking at is speed, which is 1, so they can move 1 hex per turn of the battle, and then defense, which is 3. And this defensive number, after you've been hit by an enemy, you get a chance to roll to see if the hit is negated by this defense number. You have to roll this number or lower. And there are some modifiers that go into all of these things. So basically, if this rifle unit gets hit, we're going to roll another die, and it has to be a 1, 2, or 3 to negate that hit. Defensive 3 in this game is actually fairly high, as we'll see with some of our other units. And then there's some special conditions in here. So we lose -2 off our attack rolls if we've moved, and we can only use armor piercing at range 0. So we can't attack armor piercing. We can't attack tanks and hexes next to us, for example. Also, we will pick up stress. We'll talk about the stress mechanic in the game. We're going to get stressed if the unit moves and attacks in the same turn. But we'll go into that in a little bit more detail as we start the combat. For now, let's go on and take a look at the other 4 infantry teams that we've picked. So these 4 infantry units are more specialized than the basic rifle teams. On the left side, we can see that we have 2 machine gun teams. The top one is a regular one and the bottom one is experienced. And basically, if you can look at these attack numbers now, we can see that the armor piercing attack is a 9 for this. So very ineffective. We'd have to roll a 9 or a 10 to hit a tank, for example. But it's very effective against high explosive targets, rolling a 2 or better. So an 80% chance that it's going to, a 90% chance actually, that it's going to hit another enemy infantry unit. So I'm hoping that these machine gun teams can be very effective against enemy infantry and against soft targets. Likewise, it has a defense of 2, which is a little bit less than our rifle teams. So hopefully we'll be able to keep them a little bit more protected. That might be tricky to do. On the right-hand side, we have an anti-tank team. So this is really the opposite, if you would, of our machine gun teams. This anti-tank team has an armor-piercing attack of 6 and a high explosive attack of 8. So a 50% chance that it's going to hit armored units. It still has a range of 1, so it can only attack them if it's adjacent or in the same hex. But 50% chance for infantry to hit armor is pretty good. Likewise, I really like these. So I've played a campaign and a half so far. The mortar teams, you can see they're expensive, 12 special option points, but they're very cool because they can do indirect fire. So that means line of sight obstacles aren't going to get in their way. They're very effective. So I've taken an experienced mortar team. It's got a range of 1 to 3, which is nice because most all the infantry units, again, are 0 or 1. So we can hit units 3 hexes away. It's got good attack rolls, both armor piercing of 6 and high explosive of 4. And then a defense of 2. It's also got this little thing called 1 tactic, which we'll explain as we get closer to the combat, the battle missions itself. So I'm really excited about this mortar team. I'm hopeful we can keep them out of harm's way and use them to devastating effect as enemy forces advance on us. Now let's take a look at the fun part, the tanks. All right, so this is the fun part, our tanks. These are, in essence, I'm hoping they'll be our damage dealers. These are the ones that are going to cause chaos and destruction. They are expensive units. The tanks are 14, 15, 13, and this light Stuart is an expense cost of 8. So they cost us a lot to buy these. So we got 4 of them. They have good attack numbers, armor piercing and high explosive of 6, and in that range. The Stuart is not so good, so I'm curious to see how this one performs in battle. They have the Shermans. On the left, we have a Sherman and we have a Jumbo. A defense of 2 for the Sherman, and then this Jumbo has a defense of 3, which is very strong. So I'm hopeful that these units will be able to kind of pull off a good amount of damage on enemy units, and we'll talk more about how they work as we get going. The only one I've got a question mark, I haven't used one of these yet, is a Stuart. You know, this armor piercing of 7 is pretty low, is not really that good if you think about some of the modifiers that are going to come in. But each one a little bit different. We got a Wolverine down here in the bottom right. Looking forward to seeing how they perform. Now that we've picked our 12 units, we come to another fun part. We get to select our commanders. And we're going to have to pick 12 commanders to be attached to each one of those units. The commanders play a huge role in the game. They gain experience as they go forward. They also gain stress and they can die. So this is really kind of, each commander is an individual person that is in charge of that particular unit. So it adds a cool kind of role-playing and experience dynamic to the game that I've really enjoyed. So I'm going to go through now and I'm going to pick our 12 commanders, and then we're going to take a look at what we've done with that. All right, so I've gone through and picked 12 brave souls to lead our forces into battle. Let's take a look at these in groups of 4. Now, just as a reminder, each one of these commanders has 6 different levels of experience. And the way we determine what levels we can start with is by looking back at our campaign card. And then the Italian campaign, the first 4 commanders we pick have to be raw recruits, the absolute lowest level. The next 4 are green, which are just 1 level better than recruit. And then the next 4 we get to pick out of those 12 are at average level. Basically, you fill up the slots as you go left to right across that card. So we were able to pick 4 recruits, 4 green commanders, and 4 average commanders. Let's take a look at each of those groupings in turn and just make a couple of comments about them. So here are our green commanders, and let's just do a little bit of an explanation on how they work. Each commander can command a particular type of unit. So we have 3 of our infantry commanders. These are our recruits, the greenest of the green, if you would. And we're going to have 1 of our armor commanders be a recruit, Commander Johnson. So basically just kind of looking at these and explaining how these cards work quickly. Underneath their level, which is recruit, we see this number 4. This is how many experience points they need in order to be able to level up to the next level. And the way this works in the game is that there are 6 card faces for each commander. So if Sanders gets enough experience, he's going to level up to be a green level commander, and then a lot of his numbers, as we'll see down below, improve. Right now, though, Sanders, Moore, Kelly, and Johnson are all as green as they can get. They are recruit level. On the left side here, we see their cool rating, and these are all 0 for these recruits right now. This is how many stress they're able to take off at the end of a battle. So that helps in terms of being able to relieve stress, because stress is a big element down here. And the way stress comes in, the way it impacts commanders, is we can see down here below, we've got this little chart for each one of them. If the stress level is at a particular level, it will give you a status update. And then we have the speed of the commander, which is whether they act before the enemy or after the enemy. So all of these commanders are slow. That means the enemy's going to go first before their units attack. Lastly, over here we see this number 0 and 1+. This is their die roll modifiers for the particular range they're fighting at. So if Colonel Sanders' unit is attacking an enemy that's in the same hex as them, they're going to subtract 1 from their 2 hit roll, making it less likely that they're going to be able to hit. So once they get shaken, as you can see Sanders here, if he is under 3 or 4 stress, and stress accumulates from week to week and battle to battle, then he's going to be a -3 on his die rolls, making it highly unlikely that his unit's going to be able to hit anything. At 1+, he's a little bit better. So our recruit commanders, we're not expecting too much for them. We're going to put our 3 infantry recruit commanders on those really cheap infantry teams and send them forward. So they're going to be inexperienced teams with inexperienced commanders. Again, we're not expecting much from our infantry, our rifle squads that don't have very good experience and skills. Johnson is going to go on the Stuart tank, by the way. Let's take a look at our green commanders real quick. So these are our green commanders. Again, you could see in our earlier units and our recruits that a lot of the numbers were negative modifiers. If these aren't under a lot of stress, basically they're not going to negatively impact our die rolls, which is good. And even Commander Dart here has a 1 for a cool number, so he's going to be able to relieve some of his stress after battles. One just side note, a shout out to Dan Verssen Games. A lot of commanders are commanders of color, or we also have Hispanic, we have Native American, and even an Asian American commander. Ahistorical for sure, but I really like to see that because it just welcomes more people to the gaming experience. So just a shout out for doing that. It's highly noticeable in the game. I think it's great, even though it is, slightly ahistorical within the context of how this would have been fought out. So these are our green commanders. They're going to go on the other infantry units. Now let's take a look at our armor commander and then as well as our mortar team commander. Here are our 4 average commanders. And again, there's 6 levels. These are level 3, so they could go quite a bit higher. In a 3-week campaign, to be honest, we're not going to see many, if any, of these commanders gain enough experience to be able to level up. In my experience, it's going to take a little bit longer campaign to do that, but we should still see how the mechanic works and probably see maybe 1 or 2 of these level up if we're lucky. So we have Commander Redtree. He's probably sergeant level, I would assume. He's our infantry commander. We're going to put him on that experienced mortar team and hope that he can deal a lot of damage. Then Smithers, Philbrand, and Cushing are all going to get some of our better armored tanks to be able to lead those. And we can see now down here with their experience, if they're not, if their status is okay and they're not shaken, they get plus modifiers to their die rolls, which makes it more likely that they're going to be able to hit things they're actually shooting at. So we want to put our better commanders on our tanks and hope that they can deal a lot of damage. Now, one thing to mention with this too, if you're watching this and you would like to take control of a commander, put down in the comments below that you would like to be one of the commanders in the game. One of the things that I think we can do to make this a little bit more fun is we're going to replace these names with people that are actually watching the series. So put down below if you'd like armor or infantry. First come, first serve. Just put your name and say what you'd like. I'll do my best to fill all those out. And the first 12 people we get, if we get 12, if we don't, we'll just rename 6 of them or something like that, whatever happens. I'm just going to replace this name with your name, and you can be a commander in the game. Now, no responsibility. I take no responsibility if I happen to kill you off in turn 1. I'm sorry already. Some of you might be heroes and some of you might have very negative experiences. That's how the battle can roll sometimes. But feel free to join into the fun if you would like a little bit of commander into the game. And with that, that brings us to the end of the campaign setup. But let's just give a precursor of our next episode and talk a little bit about what comes next. So the next thing that happens once the campaign is set up is that we've got all our units picked, we've got our commanders picked, we've determined the enemy battalions and stuff. We're going to shift into the week mode, week 1. And the first thing we're going to do when we start the next episode is pick our special condition card, which is kind of a random event that applies to the course of battles over that week. And then we're also going to divide our units up and determine what units are going to attack what battalions. Now, just as a precursor, I've already thought about that. We're going to attack this scout force, which is unit 4A, because that's close to our front lines. And it's a smaller force of about 10 units. We're also going to attack this infantry battalion, which is up at the enemy transit area, 6A. This is a much larger force. It's got about 16 units in it, so that's going to be a large battle. Our first battle in the first week is we're going to take about 5 or 6 of our units, probably 1 tank and probably 4 or 5 infantry units, and head out against this scout force, because each one of our units can fight 1 battle per week. And there's going to be a 3-week campaign, so each unit will fight in 3 battles should it survive the whole campaign. So that's what we're going to do next time. We're going to pick our special event card. We're going to have our first battle, taking about 5 of our units and commanders going up against this enemy battalion 4A, this scout force of 10 units, 2 tanks, 2 rifle squads, 2 machine guns, 2 trucks, and 2 armored cars. And with that, we are ready to start our first battle in our next episode. Again, if you'd like to be a commander in the series, please drop a comment down below letting me know what type you'd like, and I'll try to get you in there as best as I can. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you in our next episode.